In the time of the Roman Empire, there was a tribe of fierce warriors known as the Tizani. They lived in the shadowed mountains, where the snow never melted and the clouds forever veiled the skies. The Tizani were a proud and independent people, but they were also feared by their neighbors for their skill in war and their ferocity in battle. One day, the Persians decided to invade the lands of the Tizani. King Artaxerxes led his army into the mountains, hoping to conquer the Tizani and add their lands to his empire. But he did not expect the resistance that awaited him. The Tizani fought back with all their might, led by their valiant king Tigranes, for years. The Persians were unable to make any progress against them. However, as the war dragged on, Tigranes began to lose hope. They were exhausted and demoralized, and it seemed as though the Persians would eventually wear them down just when it looked like all was lost. A Roman general named Lucius Cornelius Sylla arrived with reinforcements. He had heard of the bravery of the Tizani and had come to help them in their time of need. With the help of the Romans, the Tizani were able to defeat the Persians and drive them out of their lands. But this victory came at a great cost. The Tizani had suffered greatly during the war, and their country was in ruins. It was then that something truly remarkable happened as the Romans celebrated their victory. The Tizani king approached Sylla and asked him to stay in their land and protect them from future invaders. In return, they would give the Romans half of everything they owned. Sylla agreed to this proposal, and the Romans settled in the mountains for a time. The Tizani and the Romans lived together in peace and prosperity. However, this fragile alliance was soon put to the test after Sylla's death. The Roman Senate decided to annex the Tizani lands and make them a part of the empire. The Tizani were furious and rebelled against the Romans. But they were no match for the Roman legions and were soon defeated despite their loss. The Tizani refused to submit to the Romans. They fled to the mountains and waged a guerrilla war against them. Eventually, the Romans grew tired of the conflict and allowed the Tizani to keep their independence in the end. Both sides realized that they had more to gain from trade and diplomacy than from war, and so the Tizani became a valuable ally of Rome, providing them with much-needed grain and other resources. What do you think of this forgotten tale? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, stay tuned. The eastern provinces of the Roman Empire, the Caliphate, begins to spread like wildfire and overthrows one kingdom after another. But in my opinion, we should begin our story with the mountains, because everything that happens later derives its origin from here. What mountains am I talking about? The Taurus mountain range of Cilicia. First it passes Cappadocia, then Armenia and the land of the so-called Sarmenians. A little before this, King Khosroes of the Persians waged war against the Emperor Anastasius. Against him went the brothers of the deceased king Bahram and Varas, who had fled to Constantinople and were friends of the Romans. And when the Persians arrived, they began to bombard the city. It was about 10 months since the Persians entered Mesopotamia when the Emperor Anastasius returned from Alexandria. In taking over the command, he decided to end the war as quickly as possible. He entrusted Belisarius with 7,000 soldiers to cross the Taurus mountains and ravage the lands of the Persians. As he approached the mountains, he met the famous General Alboin, who offered him friendship. After reaching an agreement, Belisarius passed through the Caspian gates, which had been left unguarded, and ravaged the whole country until he came to the river Tigris. On the other hand, the General Artapus, setting sail from the harbor of Trebizond, invaded the northern coast of Cilicia. The Persians, who were encamped on the shore, did not dare to fight against him and withdrew into the interior. At the same time, the Emperor Anastasius, having learned that the river was shallow at this point, rode across with his cavalry and fell upon the Persians who had fled in headlong flight. The victorious emperor pursued them as far as the Tigris, where the Persians turned again and blocked his way. A fierce battle ensued. The Persians were routed a second time and fled to the city of Dara, where King Khosrau had previously taken refuge. Thus, the entire Persian army was hemmed in by sea and land. Now, the Caliph Anastasius had gone to Alexandria for his health at the news of the war. Heeding his wife's words, he left the army, and soon after, his wife died. You know, emperors are often victims of their wives, and so it happened here, too. And so the generals of the Roman army in the east, Artabas and Belisarius, were preparing for defense, putting aside the lengthy account of the war. I want to tell you what happened during the siege of the city of Dara. King Khosrau, who was besieged in the city, was dying of illness, and he sent a letter to Justinian offering to surrender the city and leave with his army if his life was spared. Justinian accepted these terms, but when Khosrau wanted to leave the city, the emperor had him arrested and sent him in chains to Constantinople. When this happened, a certain eunuch, a Georgian by race and a follower of Khosrau, took up arms against the Romans and proclaimed himself king. His reign of terror lasted only 3 years because he was killed by a Roman soldier named Bacorius, who was in his pay. When suddenly word arrived from Khosrau that he had killed the Persian monarch and that he wished for permission to enter the city with his troops and plunder it, Anastasius was horrified at this and ordered the ambassadors to be thrown into a dungeon. Thus, the war began. This monarch, who had a reputation for being very brave and warlike, did very great damage to the Romans. However, he died after reigning 7 years, and his son, Hormisdas, ascended the throne. Now this ruler, though endowed by nature with all the gifts which could make him excellent and render him dear to his subjects, was of a timid disposition and preferred living in peace rather than waging wars. Moreover, he was extremely cruel and hated even his own relatives and brothers. Hence, he put to death his brother Bahram and sister, and then married his brother's widow, half-sister of his own. Now, as he was leading his life in this way, he had a dream which seemed to foretell that his end would be most shameful and miserable. And after this dream, he became even more suspicious and bloodthirsty, and he began to put to death everyone whom he thought could be dangerous to him. At this point, the generals of the army began to fear and were plotting how to kill him and set his son on the throne. One of them, a certain Mersicus, persuaded the caliph's wife, who was sister to him and mother of his son, to help them in this plot. She pretended she wanted to do what her husband had done to his brothers and sisters and sent her brother away from court on suspicion. When her plan succeeded, she came to her husband and stabbed him in the neck with a knife while he was bathing. And though he managed to get out alive, the wound turned out to be fatal. After he died, the queen gave her brother the title of king and retired to a monastery. Then it passes also Albania and Iberia and all the other countries in this region, both independent and subject to Persia. For it extends to a great distance, and as one proceeds along this range, it always spreads out to an extraordinary breadth and rises to an imposing height. And as one passes beyond the boundary of Iberia, there is a sort of path in a very narrow passage, extending for a distance of 50 stades. This path terminates in a place cut off by cliffs, and as it seems absolutely impossible to pass through, for from there no way out appears, except indeed a small gate set there by nature, which has been called from of old the Caspian Gates. From there on, there are plains suitable for riding, and extremely well-watered and extensive tracts used as pasture land for horses and level besides. Here, almost all the nations of the Huns are settled, extending as far as the Maeotic Lake. Now, if these Huns go through the gate, which I have just mentioned, into the land of the Persians and the Romans, they come with their horses fresh and without, making any detour or encountering any precipitous places, except in those 50 stades over which, as has been said, they pass to the boundary of Iberia. However, they go by any other passes, they reach their destination with great difficulty and can no longer use the same horses for the detours which they are forced to make are many and steep besides. When this was observed by Alexander, the son of Philip, he constructed gates in the aforesaid place and established a fortress there. and this was held by many men in turn as time went on, and finally by Ambasus, a Hun by birth, but a friend of the Romans and the Emperor Anastasius. Now, when this Ambasus had reached an advanced age and was near to death, he sent to Anastasius, asking that money be given him on condition that he hand over the fortress and the Caspian gates to the Romans. But the Emperor Anastasius was incapable of doing anything without careful investigation, nor was it his custom to act thus, reasoning therefore that it was impossible for him to support soldiers in a place which was destitute of all good things, and which had nowhere in the neighborhood a nation subject to the Romans, and which besides was watched on every side by the Persians, and could easily be cut off and taken by storm. He expressed deep gratitude to the man for his goodwill toward him, but by no means accepted this proposition. So Ambasus died of disease not long afterwards, and Kabads overpowered his sons and took possession of the gates. The emperor, Anastasius, after concluding the treaty with Kabads, built a city in a place called Daras, exceedingly strong and of real importance, bearing the name of the emperor himself. Now this place is distant from the city of Nisibis 100 stades lacking 2, and from the boundary line which divides the Romans from the Persians about 28. And the Persians, though eager to prevent the building, were quite able to do so, being constrained by the war with the Huns in which they were engaged. But as soon as Kabads brought this to an end, he sent to the Romans and accused them of having built a city hard by the Persian frontier, though this had been forbidden in the agreement previously made between the Medes and the Romans. At that time, therefore, the Emperor Anastasius desired partly by threats and partly by emphasizing his friendship with him, and by bribing him with no mean sum of money to deceive him and to remove the accusation. And another city also was built by this emperor in Armenia, hard by the boundaries of Persia. Now, in this place, there had been a village from of old, but it had taken on the dignity of a city by the favor of the Emperor Theodosius, even to the name for it had come to be named after him. Casa surrounded it with a very substantial wall, and thus gave the city greater strength. In fact, a little later, this place became necessary for the Romans. When this happened, the general Khosrow, who was at the head of the Persian army at the border, hearing that the king was dead, assembled his troops and prepared for war. Bellerophon, who was in charge of the defense of the city, made preparations to resist the enemy. Having received the summons to prepare the baths, Belisarius knew that they were inviting him into an ambush. So instead, he just dug more traps around his own camp, while he pretended to move his men closer to the river, but actually secretly moved his men further back and left the shallow pits concealed. It was situated 5 furlongs from the city walls and extended as far as the river. Belisarius came to Justinian and told him that the Persians had left the country and that he himself had followed them. He had a couch placed in the atrium of his palace for him and sent in physicians to treat his wounds. Henceforth, you shall live in luxury, enjoy all the pleasures that the heart desires, and have no more anxieties about the future. And as for the man who accused you unjustly, you shall hear what I say about him. Then Justinian sent for Solomon and had him flogged in Belisarius' presence. The history of Belisarius, the man who had saved the empire, had become one of misfortune and ruin, and so ends this book. Justinian asked, "What country are you talking about?" And Belisarius answered, "The land of the Isaurians," but he lied. So Justinian sent for Solomon, the man Belisarius had flogged, and asked him what the truth was. Solomon said, "I swear by the sun and moon, and by you yourself, holy emperor." Then Justinian summoned Belisarius and accused him of having abandoned his post and of cowardice. Belisarius could not deny the charge, so he threw himself at the emperor's feet and implored him to send someone to investigate the matter. Justinian agreed and appointed a certain general named Theodore, who was traveling through Syria, to go and inquire into the affair. Belisarius then escorted Theodore to the border, and as they parted, Belisarius said to him, "I beg of you, "Do not condemn me before you hear my defense." When Theodore returned to the emperor, he reported what Belisarius had said. "Okay, and the danger in which I placed myself was considerable, all for nothing." Justinian promised to send for him on the morrow, but that same night, Justinian woke up from sleep and wrote a letter to Belisarius. In it, he said, "You are accused of having deserted your post and of cowardice, and I am going to send one of my officials to get your explanation. Whenever he comes to you, you must hand over all your seals and insignia of command and follow him without delay." Early next morning, Belisarius read the letter and felt dread and sorrow, thinking, "My labors have been great, my wounds numerous. Nevertheless, he was determined to obey the emperor's commands. He called together the leaders of the armies, summoned all the people to the forum, and there delivered a farewell speech. He reminded them of the countless hardships he had endured for them, and had even managed to build a bridge, of the battles he had fought, and said, "And now that I have labored so hard for the empire," when the letters arrived, Belisarius laughed and said, "I am being sent away, disgraced and dishonored. O my soldiers, I am about to depart, but may the gods grant that my successor may win greater victories for Rome." Then he left the city and went to meet Theodore. "You presumptuous barbarian, I will come and kill you." Exclaim. On the way, he handed over the insignia of his authority to the man sent by Justinian. On the other side of the river, the Persians were making their preparations too. When everything was ready, Asmodeus sent letters to Belisarius and Germanus, each one summoning the other to meet him in single combat, ordering them to leave all their troops behind and to bring no more than 3 attendants with them. "How can you wish to fight me, who am old and have been wounded many times? What sort of a man are you that you dare summon me, a man who is not even your equal, to meet you in single combat? Send your whole army against me if you want to fight." Belisarius also dispatched several officers to tell Germanus not to fight the Persians alone, but to attack them with the whole force of the Romans. Meanwhile, Germanus came to the bridge and there met the Persian general. The other generals were anxious for Germanus, but he forbade them to come near, saying, "Do you want to shame me by coming to my assistance? If I cannot manage with this man, I shall call for you." As the fight continued, the Persian kept shouting, "Come on, old man, are you tired yet? Would you like us to bring in the women to dance?" Belisarius entered the city and told the emperor about the Persian's demand that they should fight in single combat. The Germanus kept fighting bravely. Had they not driven us out of Persia? And when the Persian became exhausted and was losing the fight, the Persian saw this and thought he had won. Germanus then jumped off his horse and continued fighting on foot, and eventually he managed to disarm and kill Asmodeus. Afterwards, the generals rushed in and acclaimed Germanus as the winner. "For we shall not stop until we take our revenge on the Persians." Germanus had come to avenge the insult to Belisarius, but now he wanted to punish the Persians for what they had done to him. He was to join up with Belisarius, and then, together, they were to march against the Persians. These orders were carried to Germanus by a certain officer named Solomon, a man whom Germanus disliked because he considered him worthless. However, when Solomon handed over the letter to Germanus, he said, "Beware of trusting this letter to unworthy hands." This confused Germanus and made him think that Solomon was implying that he himself was unworthy. So they ended up quarreling. And as a result, Germanus did not cross the Euphrates to join Belisarius. After some time had elapsed, Belisarius came to him and asked why he had not crossed the river and joined him. Coitz showed him the letter and explained how Solomon had insulted him. Hearing this, Belisarius was angry with Solomon and rebuked him sharply. "Is this the way you show respect to the bearer of such commands? Did you really think that I would believe you against my own officers?" Then he ordered Solomon to be stripped naked and flogged. As soon as he had recovered, he summoned the chiefs of the cavalry and infantry and urged them to get ready for action, since the enemy had pitched camp nearby. We have here the account by Procopius of the events that occurred after Belisarius was appointed general of the East in his encounter with the Persians. And he collected a very formidable army and came to Daras. Suddenly, someone reported to Belisarius and Hermogenes that the Persians were expected to invade the land of the Romans, and all of them made camp in a place called Amadios. Among the leaders of this army were Pityaxis and the one-eyed Barismanes. And Hermogenes said, "Behold, the enemy is now within our power." Kay was greatly alarmed and consulted with his officers as to what he ought to do. "By the faith of Perozes, I am ready to pay whatever is demanded of me." And when they had entered, he closed the gates, and they were enclosed within the city. And the Romans shouted aloud from the top of the walls, and the Romans pursued them, taking Perozes prisoner, commonly known as the Secret History or the Deeds of Belisarius. Hi, it was written by the Byzantine historian Procopius of Caesarea in the 6th century AD. In this passage, saw a little bit of Procopius's writing skill. Let us know in the comments below. He was one of the few people who actually understood how this seemingly inexplicable victory was achieved. It seems the secret was lost with him. Indeed, he was taken beside the Euphrates River, and when Belisarius got him into his power, he led him about the city, reviling him and reproaching him for his misconduct. Then, after casting lots, he divided the booty and dispatched Perozes to Constantinople, and so ended this campaign. Come on, come on. And the barbarians, looking around, wondered exceedingly at what had happened. They knew not, indeed, that the Romans had made another trench. Okay, they thought that they had broken through the Roman lines and were within the city. So then they rushed into the city in disorderly fashion and drew up in battle array, to grow uneasy at what they said and to suspect that some other treachery was at hand. But I cannot withdraw my troops from the king's provinces, for I have come here under orders from him. But we're merely shutting the gates and keeping them shut. And on the other hand, those who remained within the city were shouting loudly and encouraging the men to come on and fight. And they kept on shouting like madmen until the barbarians began. And accordingly, they began to draw back towards the gate and to try to break through it and get out. But the Romans prevented them and fought with those who were coming out. And these were slain to a man. If therefore you will allow me to withdraw into my own country with all my possessions, I will conclude peace with you. But Belisarius paid no heed to these proposals, thinking within himself that he ought by all means to gain a victory over the Persians and exact tribute from them. Accordingly, he said, "Very well, since you will not conclude peace, we shall see which of us is the more fortunate." Perozes said, "What is it that you want?" Some said he must needs try to break through the lines of the Romans and go out of the city. Others said he should send envoys into the city to learn what it was that the Romans wanted, but he did neither of these things. Instead, he sent out to the Roman camp for Belisarius, and he went out to meet him. And when they had met and saluted each other according to the custom, "Tell me frankly, and I will do my best to grant your requests." Then Belisarius said, "I myself desire nothing whatever. It is the Emperor Justinian who has sent me hither. Let us open the gates and close the trench, allowing them to enter. He demands that you shall pay tribute to him and withdraw your troops from his provinces." Accordingly, they did just as he said. "If you agree to this, I am ready to conclude peace and return home." For thus the Persians designate this office, Perozes by name. Okay, and the thing which we have to do is easy and free from danger, if only we will take courage. Let us dig another trench precisely similar to that one, starting from the same point. And when the enemy shall enter the city, then they will be enclosed within the city and will not be able to escape. But one general held command over them all, a Persian, whose title was Mirans. This Perozes immediately sent to Belisarius, bidding him make the most vigorous preparations for the encounter, for he wished to bathe there on the following day. Accordingly, the Romans made the most vigorous preparations for the encounter, with the expectation that they would fight on the succeeding day. Being eager to capture the city of Darius, they were a very formidable sight indeed. Suddenly there came upon him and his escort a troop of horsemen armed with bows and arrows, and the missiles sped by them so swiftly that none could get out of the way. In mounting and dismounting and such, so Perozes too was wounded in the thigh by an arrow, and the rest of his escort as well. But they soon disappeared from sight. Moreover, a second and third flight of arrows overtook them. God. So then those who had been sent as bearers of the couches to assist the general, seeing that it was impossible to escape the disaster, God threw down their couches and ran away. And the whole army was thrown into confusion. Where the royal standards were, rode on horseback and wore coats of mail, while those on the right and left flanks were on foot. And they were all armed in the most complete style of war, because those on either flank were protected by those on foot. All the bravest and most experienced warriors were stationed there. And when they heard this, they prepared for the battle as follows. They dug a deep trench with many passages across it. In the middle, there was a rather short portion straight. And starting from the extremities of the two cross trenches, they continued 2 straight trenches in the original direction to a very great distance, and arched the passages over so that they might be of use in the battle. Know that any excavations had been made. Who had been sent to him by the emperor to assist in setting the army in order. This man was formerly counselor to Vararanes at the time when he was at war with the emperor Anatolius. The emperor also sent Rufinus as ambassador, commanding him to remain in Hierapolis on the Euphrates River until he himself should give the word, which is the first event of the secret history or the deeds of Belisarius. After this, the Emperor Justinian appointed Belisarius general of the east and bade him make an expedition against the Persians. But while the Roman generals were busying themselves about the affair of the fortifications, not long afterwards the Persians came with a great army. Now, when the Persians were drawn up in their camp in battle array, then when Perozes had bathed in the river and was returning to his tent, then the generals of the Romans held a conference and were wondering how they ought to harass the enemy without exposing themselves to danger. When Perozes heard that the Romans had made a trench around the city, now, on the one hand, those who had gone out of the city were wondering why the Romans were making no effort to attack them. At sunrise, seeing the enemy advancing against them, they arrayed themselves as follows. The extremity of the left straight trench, which joined the cross trench, as far as the hill which rises here, was held by Baucis with a large force of horsemen, and by Faraz, the Arulian, on the right of these. Cana, outside at the angle formed by the cross trench in the straight section, with 300 of his nation. Trench they might, by moving quickly on thee, in order that, if those under Baucis, which extended from that point, were Sunicus and Agan Massagetæ by birth, with 600 horsemen, and Pharas should be driven back, who were commanded by John, son of Nicetas, and for the extremity of the straight trench was held by a flank, and getting in the rear of the enemy, be able easily to support the Romans at that point. On the other wing also they were arrayed in the same manner, large force of horsemen, with them also were Germanus and Dortheus, in order that, as has been by Cyril and Marcellus, while at the angle on the right 600 horsemen took their stand, commanded by Simlas and Ascan Massagetæ, said, in case the forces of John should by any chance be driven back, so as to make the front of the phalanx as deep as possible, then, separating themselves from the rest of the army, and the Romans retired ashort. The Persians, however, did not pursue them, but I suppose, moved to surround them on the Cain, they might move out from there and attack the rear of the Persians. And again, the forces of Baucis and Pharos and the Persians did not withstand their onset, and the Romans gained possession of their bodies. Then the Romans, who had turned to flight suddenly, but one Persian, thus, except a certain Andreas. In this skirmish, 7 of but a trainer of youths, and not a soldier, nor one, who had all along the trench stood the detachments of cavalry and the infantry. And behind these, in the middle, stood the forces of Belisarius, and no Hermogenes. Thus the Romans arrayed themselves, amounting to, and they all stood close together, facing the 520,000. But the Persian army consisted of 40, and he caught the 1,000 horse and foot. Through this it came front, and for a long time neither side began battle with the other to go out of. Persians seemed to be wondering at the good order of the Romans, without being ordered by Baucis or anyone else, appeared at a loss what to do under the circumstances. This man alone had in the late afternoon, a certain detachment of the horsemen who held the right wing against the forces of Baucis and Pharos. Distance to the rear, remained there, fearing part of the enemy rushed upon them, rode back to the phalanx, stationed themselves in their own position. The Persians fell. Thereafter, both armies remained quietly in position. Young man, riding up very close to the Roman army, began to challenge all of them, calling for whoever wished to do battle with him. One of the whole army dared face the danger. One of the personal attendants of Baucis ever practiced at all the business of war, charge of a certain wrestling school in Byzantium, vowed that he was following the army, for he cared for the person of Baucis in the bath. His birthplace was Byzantium. Courage, his own accord to meet the man in single combat. Barbarian, while still considering how he should deliver his attack, hit him with it, and the Persian did not bear the blow delivered by a man of such exceptional strength, and fell from his horse to the earth. Then Andreas, with a small knife, slew him like a sacrificial animal as he lay on his back, and a mighty shout was raised. But the Persians were both from the city wall and from the Roman army, a manly fellow, and well favored as to bodily size, but not deeply vexed at the outcome, and sent forth another horseman for the same purpose. This youth, for some of the hair on his head already showed gray, and, brandishing vehemently, the horseman came up along the hostile army, whip with which he was accustomed to strike his horse. He summoned two, and when no one went out battle, whoever among the Romans was willing, and both the two men fallen very close to each other, against him, Andreas, without attracting the notice of anyone, while Andreas, that the Persian was not able to, and the weapons once more came forth, although he had been forbidden to do so by Hermogenes. Both rushed madly upon each other with their spears, driven against their corselets, were turned aside with mighty force. The horses, striking together their heads, fell themselves and threw off. Then a roar went up from the wall, and from it follows that their riders, raising the best general, therefore is that one who is able to, but you, when affairs were well settled, for already it was growing, made great haste to rise to their feet, although the counsels of each king are looking toward, do this easily because his size was against him. And although our envoys are already present in the neighborhood, anticipating him, smote him as he was rising on his knee, and as he fell again to the ground, dispatched him, the Roman army as great, if not greater, than before, and the Persians and do but lead. When the Myrons saw this letter brought to broke their phalanx, and withdrew to Amodios, while the Romans, the Pan, went inside the fortifications. Dark. Thus both armies passed that night. We, therefore, on the following day, 10,000 soldiers arrived, who had been summoned by the Persians from the city of Nisibis, Belisarius, and Hermogenes, wrote to the Myrons as follows: The first blessing is peace, as is agreed by all men who have even a small share of reason. D. If anyone should be a destroyer of it, he would be most responsible, not only to those near him, but also to his whole nation for the troubles which come. Bring about peace from war between the Romans and the Persians have seen fit to bring upon us a war without cause. For here we shall be compelled either to die or grow old until peace, who will at no distant time settle all the points of dispute in talking over the situation together, lest some irreparable harm coming from your invasion proves sufficient to frustrate for us this hope. Away as soon as possible, your army to the land of the Persians, not stand in the way of the greatest blessings, lest at some time you be held responsible by the Persians, as is probable, for the disasters which will come to pass. Him, he replied as follows: I should have been persuaded by what you write, should have done what you demand, were the letter not, as it happens, from Romans, for whom the making of promises is easy, its fulfillment of the promises indeed most difficult and beyond hope, especially if you sanction the agreement by any oaths. despairing in view of your deception, have been compelled to come before you in arms. And as for you, my dear Romans, consider that from now on you will be obliged to do nothing else than make war against the Persians. You accord to us justice indeed. Such was a reply which the Myrrhans wrote back. Okay. And again, Belisarius and his generals wrote as follows. Excellent, Myrrhans. Okay. It is not fitting in all things to depend upon boasting, nor to lay upon one's neighbor's reproaches, which are, okay, for we said with truth that Rufinus, justified on no grounds whatever, had come to act as an envoy and was not far away. Who will? We, and you yourself will know this at no remote time. Okay. But since you are eager for deeds of war, okay, we shall array ourselves against you with the help of God. Okay. And we shall array, and the Myrrhans again answered as follows. Support us in the danger, being moved by the peaceful inclination, no, of the Romans, but rebuking the boastfulness of the Persians in your, and I expect that on the morrow they will, decision to resist us when we invite you to peace. Having prepared for the conflict by fastening the ourselves against you. Such was the but, let the bath and lunch be in letters written by each of us on the top of our banners, hey, and with their message of this letter. Neither are we entering upon the war without our gods. Help, we shall come before you, but seeing you bring the Persians into Daras, readiness for me within the fortifications. When Belisarius and his generals read this, they prepared themselves for the conflict. On the succeeding day, the Myrrhans called together all the Persians at 4. I would not have you think that the Romans have about sunrise, and spoke as follows. I am not ignorant that it is not, but that they have become more cowardly than they, because of words of their leaders, but because of their individual, and not even bravery in their shame before each other, that the Persians are at any rate, they fear the Persians so much that they are accustomed to be courageous in the presence of dangers. For this reason, considering why in the world it is that, although the Romans have not been accustomed heretofore to go into battle without confusion and disorder, they recently awaited the advancing Persians with a kind of, and this, together with their order, which is by no means characteristic of them. For this reason, I have decided to speak some words of exhortation to you, so that it may, but if the fighting comes to not come about, that you be deceived by reason of holding an opinion which is not true. Such, therefore, is the case with regard to the enemy. But due with this exhortation, the Myrrhans began suddenly become better warriors, or that they have acquired any more, and that all those superior to them in valor or experience were previously. This thing you have not even dared to form their phalanx without a trench. With this did they begin any fighting, but when we did not join battle. Likewise, Belisarius and her Megaeans with them at all, joyfully, and considering that matters had gone better for them than they had hoped, they withdrew to the wall. 2. It happened that they were not thrown into confusion, for they had not yet come into the dangers of battle. Close quarters, fear will seize upon them, inexperience will throw them, in all probability, into their customary for, while the disorder. You, O men of Persia, call to mind the judgment of the King of Kings. For if you do not play the part of brave men in the present engagement, key, in a manner worthy of the valor of the Persians, an inglorious punishment will fall upon you, to lead his army against the enemy. So gathered all the Romans before the fortifications and encouraged them with the following words. You know assuredly that the Persians are not altogether invincible, nor too strong to be killed, having taken their measure in the previous battle. Okay? Bravery and in strength of body, you were defeated only by reason of being rather heedless of your officers. No one can deny. Okay? Now have the opportunity to set right with no trouble. Adversities of fortune are by no means such as to be set right by an effort. Reason may easily become for a man a physician for the ills caused by himself. Took their stand facing the Romans. But the Myrrhans did not array all the Persians against the enemy, but only one half of them. These were to take thee while he allowed the others to remain behind, as places of the men who were fighting, and to fall upon their opponents, so that all might fight in constant rotation, with their vigor intact. But the detachment of the so-called immortals alone be ordered to remain in this manner, then both at rest until he himself should give the signal. And he took his own station at the middle of the front, putting Pityaxis in command on the butt if we conceal ourselves on right wing, and Barismanes on the left. Then Phares came before Belisarius and Hermogenes were drawn up. If we, and said, it does not seem to me that I shall do the enemy any great heed as soon, however, as to harm if I remain here with the Aruli, while the slope, and then, when the Persians have begun the fight, climb up by this hill and suddenly come upon their rear. Shooting from behind them, we shall in all probability do them the greatest harm. Thus he spoke, and, since it pleased Belisarius and his staff, carried out this plan. At first, then, both sides discharged arrows against each, and for this reason they thought but up to midday, neither side began battle. Then, afternoon hour was past, the barbarians began to fight. Having postponed, and the battle had come still more to close on the Roman side, the left wing was suffering especially for the engagement to this time of the day, for the reason that they are accustomed to partake of food only towards late afternoon. Romans have their meal before noon. But even so, the Romans did not have the worst of, when this was observed by thee that the Romans would never hold out so well. They assailed them while hungry, and made a wonderful display of valorous deeds in the Persians. But the missiles of thee and there was a great for a steady wind blew from their side against the barbarians. Another, and the missiles by their great number made, as it were, a vast, but both sides took their stand, facing each. 4 fresh men were always fighting in, on the Persian right wing, not fewer than, and the rout became complete. For the while the rest escaped with, and the Romans did not. Cloud and many men were falling on both sides. Barbarians flew much more thickly, affording to their enemy not the slightest opportunity to observe what was being done. Checked to a considerable degree the force of their arrows. Both sides had exhausted all their missiles. They began to use their spears against each other. Quartus, the Catacini, who with pitchaxes were fighting at this point, rushing up suddenly in great numbers, routed their enemy. And crowding hard upon the fugitives, were killing many of them. Men under Sunicus and Agan, they charged against them at full speed. But first, the 300 Aruli under Phares from the high ground got in the rear of the enemy against all of them, and especially the Catacini. Seeing the forces of Seneca to already coming up against them from the flank, turned to a hasty flight. Romans here joined forces with each other. Slaughter of the barbarians. 3,000 perished in this action, difficulty to the phalanx, and were saved. Continued their pursuit, other in line. Such was the course of these events. Thus matters stood with the Romans. But the Persians, though defeated by Belisarius at the battle at Daras, refused even so to retire from there until Rufinus, coming into the presence of Cabes, spoke as follows: O king, I have been sent by thy brother, who reproaches thee with a just reproach, because the Persians for no righteous cause have come in arms into his land. But it would be more seemly for a king who is not only mighty, but also wise as thou art, to secure a peaceful conclusion of war, rather than, when affairs have been satisfactorily settled, to inflict upon himself and his people unnecessary confusion. Wherefore also I myself have come here with good hopes, in order that, from now on, both peoples may enjoy the blessings which come from peace. So spoke Rufinus. Cabes replied as follows: O son of Silvanus, by no means try to reverse the causes, understanding, as you do, best of all men, that you Romans have been the chief cause of the whole confusion. For we have taken the Caspian gates to the advantage of both Persians and Romans, after forcing out the barbarians there, since Anastasius, the emperor of the Romans, as you yourself doubtless know, when the opportunity was offered him to buy them with money, was not willing to do so, in order that he might not be compelled to squander gold on the barbarians. And this very thing has turned out to our great advantage, for we have captured those gates without any trouble. And moreover, my brother has sent me a letter saying that he intends to wage war against the Turks, and that he desires us to make an agreement with him about the boundaries, for if he can get the start at them and open the way through Armenia into the country of the Turks, there will be no one to hinder his advance. And as far as concerns the Roman Empire, it is quite close at hand. Thus, therefore, I say that if your emperor does not wish to bring about an agreement, he shall pay the penalty. By the immortal gods, you are acting exceedingly foolishly, if you do not take advantage of this opportunity to conclude peace while you can still do so. For you must know that my master, the invincible King Cavitus, has under his command 30,000 horsemen. Moreover, we have advanced thus far, and we have done this easily. Do you think it impossible that we should go on to do greater things? Or do you think that we shall return home? Fie on such thoughts. Rather hear what I have further to say. Let there be a 3 days truce, and let there be ambassadors between the two kings, in order that we may discuss the terms of peace. And let there be hostages also given by the Romans, since it is right that they who began hostilities should not destroy everything before the conclusion of peace. But if they do not do these things, then let them expect that we shall attack them again, not only on this side, but also on the other side. For my master has sent word to Chosroes that he too shall lead his army against the Romans. If therefore the emperor wishes to examine what sort of fortress it is, he shall find that it is most carefully guarded. But when spring comes, the invincible king will leave this place, if he has not made an agreement beforehand, and he will invade the Roman provinces. He himself will do most mighty deeds. What need is there for me to speak of other generals? For you know well that Hormisdas is most courageous, and that he will conquer much of your Armenia, and that the invincible king will conquer me by the immortal gods. I do not think that the Roman general Belisarius is so valiant as to be able to withstand the invincible king in battle, for I have heard that he has already suffered defeat from Hormisdas. There is no danger that you will have to fear from me. And as for this fortress, if your emperor makes an agreement, we will withdraw into it. Also, there are many darts, crossbows, and catapults on the wall, and oftentimes they hurl stones from the wall weighing 200 pounds. We are now besieging a city called Dara, and if you wish to know what sort of city it is, I will tell you. And it is very strong, having been built by Chosroes, the former king of the Persians, and in the turrets are darts, crossbows, and catapults, which oftentimes fling stones weighing 200 pounds, and we have carried off much spoil from the city. And I think that in a few days more we shall capture it entirely. But Belisarius, when he heard these words, replied as follows: I have no need for your proposals. Since the immortal emperor Anastasius wished to have an interview with the invincible king, it was right that the embassy should be sent to him. Besides, if you yourselves had not sent the heralds to announce this embassy, but now that you have sent the heralds, we shall not do anything by force. But I warn you, if you do not send ambassadors to your master, let him come to me, and I will gladly give him hostages and do everything else that he pleases. But I will not do these things at the request of any other person whatever. He shall see in what way the Romans fight accordingly. He prepared to give battle. He stripped himself and girded on his sword, and buckled on his armor, and bound on his helmet. Then said the king, Belisarius, I have never seen such bravery as yours. But now let us fight. And they fought. And Belisarius smote the king on the shoulder with a spear and wounded him. There is a mountain in Armenia which is not especially precipitous, 240 stades, removed from Theodosiopolis and lying toward the north from it. From this mountain issue to springs, forming immediately to rivers, the one on the right called the Euphrates, and the other the Tigris. One of these, the Tigris, descends with no deviations and with no tributaries except small ones, emptying into it straight toward the city of Amida. and continuing into the country, which lies to the north of this city, it enters the land of Assyria. But the Euphrates at its beginning flows for a short distance and is then immediately lost to sight as it goes on. It does not, however, become subterranean, but a very strange thing happens. For the water is covered by a bog of great depth, extending about 50 stades in length and 20 in breadth, and reeds grow in this mud in great abundance. But the earth there is of such a hard sort that it seems to those who chance upon it to be nothing else than solid ground, so that both pedestrians and horsemen travel over it without any fear. Nay, more, even wagons pass over the place in great numbers every day, but they are wholly insufficient to shake the bog or to find a weak spot in it at any point. The natives burn the reeds every year to prevent the roads being stopped up by them. And once, when an exceedingly violent wind struck the place, it came about that the fire reached the extremities of the roots, and the water appeared at a small opening. But in a short time the ground closed again and gave the spot the same appearance which it had had before. From there the river proceeds into the land called Seleucine, where was the sanctuary of Artemis among the Taurians, from which they say, Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon, fled with Orestes and Pylades, bearing the statue of Artemis. For the other temple, which has existed even to my day in the city of Comana, is not the one among the Taurians. But I shall explain how this temple came into being. When Orestes had departed in haste from the Taurians with his sister, it so happened that he contracted some disease. And when he made inquiry about the disease, they say that the oracle responded that his trouble would not abate until he built a temple to Artemis in a spot such as the one among the Taurians, and there cut off his hair and named the city after it. So then Orestes, going about the country there, came to Pontus, and saw a mountain which rose steep and towering, while below, along the extremities of the mountain, flowed the river Iris, Orestes. Therefore, supposing at that time that this was the place indicated to him by the oracle, built there a great city in the temple of Artemis, and, shearing off his hair, named after it the city which even up to the present time has been called Comana. The story goes on that after Orestes had done these things, the disease continued to be as violent as before, if not even more so. Then the man perceived that he was not satisfying the oracle by doing these things, and he again went about looking everywhere and found a certain spot in Cappadocia, very closely resembling the one among the Taurians. I myself have often seen this place and admired it exceedingly, and have imagined that I was in the land of the Taurians. For this mountain resembles the other remarkably, since the Taurus is here also, and the river Sarus is similar to the Euphrates there. So Orestes built in that place an imposing city and 2 temples, the one to Artemis and the other to his sister Iphigenia, which the Christians have made sanctuaries for themselves without changing their structure at all. This is called even now Golden Comana, being named from the hair of Orestes, which they say he cut off there and thus escaped from his affliction. Some say that this disease from which he escaped was nothing else than that of madness which seized him after he had killed his own mother. But I shall return to the previous narrative. From Tauric Armenia and the land of Seleucine, the river Euphrates, flowing to the right of the Tigris, flows around an extensive territory. And since many rivers join it, and among them the Arsenus, whose copious stream flows down from the land of the so-called Persians, becomes naturally a great river and flows into the land of the people, anciently called White Syrians, but now known as the Lesser Armenians. Its first city, Melitene, is one of great importance. From there, it flows past Samosata and Hierapolis, and all the towns in that region as far as the land of Assyria, where the 2 rivers unite with each other into one stream which bears the name of the Tigris. The land which lies outside the river Euphrates, beginning with Samosata, was called in ancient times Kamaji, but now it is named after the river. But the land inside the river, that namely which is between it and the Tigris, is appropriately named Mesopotamia. However, a portion of it is called not only by this name, but also by certain others. For the land, as far as the city of Amida, has come to be called Armenia by some, while Edessa, together with the country around it, is called Osran, after Osras, a man who was king in that place in former times, when the men of this country were in alliance with the Persians. After the time, therefore, when the Persians had taken from the Romans the city of Nisibis and certain other places in Mesopotamia, whenever they were about to make an expedition against the Romans, they disregarded the land outside the river Euphrates, which was, for the most part, unwatered and deserted by men, and gathered themselves here with no trouble, since they were in a land which was their home and which lay very close to the inhabited land of their enemy, and from here they always made their invasions. When the Vararanes was defeated in battle, and with the greater part of his men lost, came back to the Persian land with the remainder of his army, he received bitter punishment at the hands of King Kabitz. For he took away from him a decoration which he was accustomed to bind upon the hair of his head, an ornament wrought of gold and pearls. Now this is a great dignity among the Persians, second only to the kingly honor. For there it is unlawful to wear a gold ring or girdle or brooch or anything else whatsoever, except a man be counted worthy to do so by the king. Thereafter Kabitz began to consider in what manner he himself should make an expedition against the Romans. For after the Vararanes had failed in the manner I have told, he felt confidence in no one else, while he was completely at a loss as to what he should do. Alamandaris, the king of the Saracens, came before him and said, "Not everything, O master, should be entrusted to fortune, nor should one believe that all wars ought to be successful, for this is not likely, and besides, it is not in keeping with the course of human events. But this idea is most unfortunate for those who are possessed by it, for when men who expect that all the good things will come to them fail at any time, if it so happen, they are distressed more than is seemly by the very hope which wrongly led them on. Therefore, since men have not always confidence in fortune, they do not enter into the danger of war in a straightforward way, even if they boast that they surpass the enemy in every respect. But by deception and divers devices, they exert themselves to circumvent their opponents. For those who assume the risk of an even struggle have no assurance of victory. Now, therefore, O King of Kings, neither be thus distressed by the misfortune which has befallen Vararanes, nor desire again to make trial of fortune. For in Mesopotamia, in the land of Azran, as it is called, since it is very close to thy boundaries, the cities are very strong above all others, and now they contain a multitude of soldiers such as never before, so that if we go there, the contest will not prove a safe one. But in the land which lies outside the river Euphrates, and in Syria, which adjoins it, there is neither a fortified city nor an army of any importance. For this I have often heard from the Saracens sent as spies to these parts. 2. They say is the city of Antioch, in wealth and size and population, the first of all the cities of the Eastern Roman Empire. And this city is unguarded and destitute of soldiers. For the people of this city care for nothing else than fetes and luxurious living, and their constant rivalries with each other in the theaters. Accordingly, if we go against them unexpectedly, it is not at all unlikely that we shall capture the city by a sudden attack, and that we shall return to the land of the Persians without having met any hostile army. Before the troops in Mesopotamia have learned what has happened. As for lack of water or of any kind of provisions, let no such thought occur to thee. For I myself shall lead the army wherever it shall seem best." When Kabitz heard this, he could neither oppose nor distrust the plan. For Alamandaris was most discreet and well experienced in matters of warfare, thoroughly faithful to the Persians, and unusually energetic. a man who for a space of 50 years forced the Roman state to bend the knee. For beginning from the boundaries of Egypt and as far as Mesopotamia, he plundered the whole country, pillaging one place after another, burning the buildings in his track, and making captives of the population by the tens of thousands on each raid, most of whom he killed without consideration, while he gave up the others for great sums of money. And he was confronted by no one at all, for he never made his inroad without looking about, but so suddenly did he move, and so very opportunely for himself, that, as a rule, he was already off with all the plunder, when the generals and the soldiers were beginning to learn what had happened and to gather themselves against him. Indeed, by any chance they were able to catch him, this barbarian would fall upon his pursuers while still unprepared and not in battle array, and would rout and destroy them with no trouble. And on one occasion he made prisoners of all the soldiers who were pursuing him, together with their officers. These officers were Demostratus, the brother of Rufinus, and John, the son of Lucas, whom he gave up indeed later, thereby gaining for himself no mean or trivial wealth. And, in a word, this man proved himself the most difficult and dangerous enemy of all to the Romans. The reason was this, that Alamandaras, holding the position of king, ruled alone over all the Saracens in Persia, and he was always able to make his inroad with the whole army wherever he wished in the Roman domain, Cleith, and neither any commander of Roman troops, whom they called duces, nor any leader of the Saracens allied with the Romans, the Quand Phylarchs, was strong enough with his men to array himself against Alamandaras, for the troops stationed in the different districts were not a match in battle for the enemy. 531 AD. For this reason, the Emperor Justinian put in command of as many clans as possible Aretas, the son of Gabalus, who ruled over the Saracens of Arabia, and bestowed upon him the dignity of king, a thing which among the Romans had never before been done. However, Alamandaras continued to injure the Romans just as much as before, not more, since Aretas was either extremely unfortunate in every inroad, in every conflict, or else he turned traitor as quickly as he could. For as yet, we know nothing certain about him. In this way, it came about that Alamandaras, with no one to stand against him, plundered the whole East for an exceedingly long time, for he lived to a very advanced age. This man's suggestion at that time, therefore, pleased Chabades. This was the first invasion made by the Persians from this point into Roman soil, as far as we know from tradition or by any other means, and it paralyzed all the Romans with fear by its unexpectedness. And when this news came to the knowledge of Belisarius, at first he was at a loss, but afterwards he decided to go to the rescue with all speed. So he established a sufficient garrison in each city in order that Chabades with another hostile army might not come there, find the towns of Mesopotamia utterly unguarded, and himself with the rest of the army went to meet the invasion. And crossing the river Euphrates, they moved forward in great haste. Now the Roman army amounted to about 20,000 foot in horse, and among them not less than 2,000 were Azorians. The commanders of cavalry were all the same ones who had previously fought the battle at Dares with Myrins and the Persians, while the infantry were commanded by one of the bodyguards of the Emperor Justinian, Peter by name. The Azorians, however, were under the command of Longinus and Stephanatius. Aretas also came there to join them with the Saracen army. When they reached the city of Chalcis, they encamped and remained there, since they learned that the enemy were in a place called Gabalan, 110 states away from Chalcis. When this became known to Alamandaras and Azorites, they were terrified at the danger and no longer continued their advance, but decided to retire homeward instantly. Accordingly, they began to march back, with the river Euphrates on the left, while the Roman army was following in the rear. And in the spot where the Persians bivouacked each night, the Romans always tarried on the following night. For Belisarius purposely refused to allow the army to make any longer march, because he did not wish to come to an engagement with the enemy, but he considered that it was sufficient for them that the Persians and Alexandres, after invading the land of the Romans, should retire from it in such a fashion, betaking themselves to their own land without accomplishing anything. And because of this, all secretly mocked him, both officers and soldiers, but not a man reproached him to his face. Finally, the Persians made their bivouac on the bank of the Euphrates, just opposite the city of Callinicus. From there, they were about to march through a country absolutely uninhabited by man, and thus to quit the land of the Romans. For they purposed no longer to proceed as before, keeping to the bank of the river. The Romans had passed the night in the city of Sura, and, removing from there, they came upon the enemy just in the act of preparing for the departure. AP 19,531. Now the feast of Easter was near and would take place on the following day. This feast is reverenced by the Christians above all others, and on the day before it, they are accustomed to refrain from food and drink, not only throughout the day. For a large part of the night, also, they continue the fast. Then, therefore, Belisarius, seeing that all his men were passionately eager to go against the enemy, wished to persuade them to give up this idea, for this course had been counseled by Hermogenes also, who had come recently on an embassy from the emperor. He accordingly called together all who were present and spoke as follows: O Romans, whither are you rushing? Okay? And what has happened to you that you are purposing to choose for yourselves a danger which is not necessary? Okay? Men believe that there is only one victory which is unalloyed, namely to suffer no harm at the hands of the enemy. And this very thing has been given us in the present instance by fortune and by the fear of us that overpowers our foes. Therefore, it is better to enjoy the benefit of our present blessings than to seek them when they have passed. The year is 100 AD. For 2 decades, the Roman Empire has been at war with the fiercest horde of horse archers known to man. Their skill in war is such that even the great General Corbulo has failed to defeat them. But Rome has one last hope, a new general in the east. The great and cunning Lucan, he is just taking command of the Roman legions in Cappadocia. His orders are simple: beat the bow or die trying. The cataphracts charged into the fray, their heavy armor glistening in the sun, their shields adorned with the aquila, the emblem of Rome. They fought with the fury of men possessed their swords, flashing like lightning as they cut down everything in their path. But for every warrior Rome took out, 2 more seemed to take their place. The fighting was brutal, the casualties staggering. But as the sun began its slow descent, something remarkable happened. The cataphracts, instead of breaking, began to reform. They regrouped, reformed their lines, and prepared to make one final stand in the distance. Aquinas saw the Tizani preparing to flee. He knew he had only moments to turn the tide as the Tizani began their retreat. The Roman cavalry pursued them relentlessly. They chased them over hills and through valleys, their horses thundering like an approaching storm just when it seemed the Tizani would escape. Lucanus made his move. He ordered the infantry to form a circle around the fleeing horde, trapping them like a net. Then he gave the signal to close in. The Romans surged forward, their swords held high, their battle cries echoing across the plains. The Tizani, surrounded and outnumbered, were cut down to a man, and so, from the snowy peaks of the Caucasus to the blood-soaked camps of Persarmenia, the echoes of this battle faded into the silence of history. The Tizani once feared, later stood, reborn as Christian soldiers under Rome's banner. What changed them? Was it kindness? Was it power? Or perhaps, in a war where no one expected mercy, a single Roman general showed them something different in the end. The battlefield gave rise to more than victory, it forged transformation. And that is the true legacy hidden in the mountain mist. Thanks for watching.